All right, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the OGX podcast. I'm hosting today, and I've got my pal James with me here. So some not new faces, but it's not usually just the two of us. So James, welcome back. You did an episode with Laura a few weeks
Yep.
ago. Welcome back to the OGX podcast.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Okay, so we were planning obviously this episode, and you said, "Hey, what do you want to talk about?" And it took me maybe like 3.4 seconds to say, let's talk about velocity. The reason why I think this is a great topic is because it is a conversation that I would say, and the pitching side, and I know it's not just a pitching side, but on the pitching side, that I probably have, I don't know, 5 times a week with people. It's important. It's important to the game, in the game. It's important to athletes, to their parents. Everybody is chasing it. Everybody is chasing it. And it's a wildly misunderstood concept.
hmm
I remember kind of thinking about when I was growing up that, and I think it's still the same. The culture, not at OGX, but the culture is still the same, like in the pitching world, where it's like you go to a pitching coach, you kind of like hang all of your pros and cons on that coach. So like if you're going up in velocity, you're like, that's my guy or that's my
hmm
woman. Even though it's probably just like physical maturation.
Yep.
But whatever, you like hang that on him or her, and then you stop going up in velocity and you're like, dude, it's not good anymore. Like she got me. I always hear this line, like, she got me to that point, but
hmm
now she can't get me any further. So it's like it's always this idea as if pitching by itself is what builds velocity, if that
hmm
makes sense. Like only the bullpen, only the pitching lesson, that's where you learn velocity. The idea of like seeing someone for 30 minutes a week or 60 minutes a week max, and like they're responsible for whether or not you go up for velocity, it's just like time to set the record straight. That's kind of how I
Yeah.
feel about it. You know what I
hmm
mean? Okay, so maybe let's start with I'm in debrief season. That's an understatement of the year. I'm debriefing like all day, all night because we're in college assessment season. And the final page of our report is about like the strength and conditioning side, movement quality, power, where you generate power, how much power. Um, I'm going to kick it to you. Can you tell me a little bit about, from your perspective, what role you play, obviously,
hmm
as our strength coach at OGX and sort of handling all of our athletes' programming? What role that side of things plays, that strength floor
Yeah.
plays, as far as the velocity conversation is concerned?
Yeah. So the like two main things that I use when I'm making and progressing somebody through a program is I look at the movement quality assessment and
Yep.
what their power numbers are like. Time of year and a lot of other things play into that, but generally you want to see their movement quality become more green, they pass more tests, and that their power is trending in the upward direction. uh, the same like themes that I see, like issues that athletes need to work on time and time again, is they stink on one foot. So their
Mm-hmm.
reverse lunge or moving in other planes, they can't do it very well.
Mm-hmm.
And then T spine rotation is a limiter, and
Yeah.
then anterior core strength is another one
Yeah.
that's just not good.
Yeah.
So like those are like the lower hanging fruit. All right, let's get you working better at working on one foot, because like that is what a pitch delivery is. It's like
Can,
exchanging.
can I pause you for a second,
Yeah.
James? Can you explain why, like, when I think power, and I'm going to
hmm
say but like when I think power and I think I want to jump further, I want to jump
hmm
higher, I want to sprint faster, then like, why are you talking about anterior core and like a reverse lunge? Like, what?
Yeah.
I don't get it.
So there are like multiple things that feed into you being able to throw a ball really fast. You need to have the strength to do it, and you need to have the stability to do it. So even if you're strong but you're applying force on something that's unstable, that you're leaking energy, you're losing it. So if you're trying to throw and push off on one leg, but that one leg doesn't have a lot of stability, you are losing the energy that you're trying to send toward the
Yep.
plate. And
Energy
it's
leaks.
just exactly.
Yep.
So yeah, not being efficient in your delivery is going to have leaks there. And then just not being strong in general is going to prevent you from throwing harder. So
Yep.
They all feed into each other. Like just throwing the ball is at the very end,
Yeah.
throwing the light ball, that's at one end of the force velocity curve. You need to work like along the whole thing and have stability while you do it.
I always think about the idea of velocity. It's like those, I don't know, like those pictures of the icebergs where it's like the
Mm-hmm.
success, like the tip is above the water and it's like
Yeah.
success or like something someone's achieved. And then it's like what you don't see,
Yeah.
and then it's all like, all of the iceberg or glacier like underneath the water. That's velocity.
Mm-hmm.
Like the idea of pitching
It's
velocity is the
performance.
little
Yeah.
tip. It's exactly right.
Yeah.
It's performance. And so it's the little tip on top. And so the conversations that I have with athletes and parents, they're very centered around like how do we just kind of stay above water? Like
Mm-hmm.
I want to sit on the raft, I want to sit on the boat and work and swirl around that little tip, and I want to make sure that's getting better. And so what our conversations usually entail is us opening up our data, which is so huge. All right, like
Mm-hmm.
when we go into conversations and we can just pull up someone's story, their data, their measurements, show them thresholds, athletes that produce power like this, have strength like this, stability like this, throw X, and they
Mm-hmm.
aren't there. It's just so informative. But usually, that's how those conversations go. It's like unveiling. They're not aware of everything that's underneath of that. They're really not.
Mm-hmm.
And to no fault of their own, that's just like not how it's gone in the past.
Yeah.
Okay, so more specifically, our what I really, really love about our assessment is that it's been pretty steady over the last few years. We have just been able to test it, like, I mean, over
Hundreds.
and over
Yeah.
again to see that like when this is cleaning up, athletes are getting better at this, and then it's
Yep.
yielding this, and then it's yielding this. Like the power is in the connectivity of all of
Mm-hmm.
it. And if we've done anything from a change standpoint, it's only been like we used to collect power in, I don't know, a billion tests, and it was just so clear that like this is what correlates most to pitching velocity. This is what correlates most to hitting velocity. And so we've been able to like trim the fat, if you will, right, on the assessment, even with movement quality. It's like I love when I'm telling the story on debriefs right now that I'm like, this is pitching. Like if someone's read in our movement quality, it's like single leg stability on the ground, in the air. Can you put on the brakes by absorbing force and having anterior core? Can you rotate while in the air? And then can you transfer energy out of the arm? Like it's just so
Mm-hmm.
basic, essentially,
Yeah.
So I kind of want to get into this because what we have kind of traditionally seen is that when athletes start our programming, their ability to go up in hitting exit velocity and overhand throwing velocity. No, we don't like program for overhand throwing. Let me be clear about that. But we have like teams sometimes and they measure overhand throwing velocity. The strength and conditioning, when they start making change, even to movement quality, the strength and conditioning component, immediately you start to see a difference. Like the PRs in hitting exit velocity are almost like a joke, right? It's not that simple in pitching. And I think, what's complicated about pitching, and I don't even know if I want to give it the comparison to hitting, but maybe like overhand throwing, because like people think of it as like baseball in pitching, but the airborne phase of pitching, the double rotation airborne component, makes pitching so much more susceptible to energy leaks, essentially, right? It is so much more difficult to keep energy in the system, transferring through the system.
Yeah. And long.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I don't think people really appreciate that. Like the energy leaks in the underhand motion are much more prevalent, if you will. There's so much more opportunity for breakdowns in the body. And I think that's an important concept. And this is why like this idea of like movement quality is so important. So tell me about, let's say you have an athlete whose power is actually pretty good. They come in because we have this kind of difference between some people just have innate genetic like power profiles that are pretty solid, right? And movement quality is low. I know what that looks like on the pitching side, but tell me like the type of approach you take with those athletes when you see them. They just started with us. How is that different than someone that's just kind of like low across the board?
Yeah, so somebody that comes in with some strength but not as much stability, like you'll get people that are just like larger framed and stuff too, that like think offensive linemen in football, like they could still
Yeah.
move somebody. It may not look good, but like they could still move somebody.
Yeah.
Uh, and they can still move their body and have a good broad jump or whatever. But when you talk about like the finesse and the timing and the sequencing of underhand
Mm,
throwing, you
yeah.
need to have like you need the awareness of your body. You need to like be able to feel rhythm. So that's like a big piece of what I incorporate in our warm-ups before they even do it, and their sprinting and their different jump variations that they have. I
Yeah.
have them move in different planes. I have them like you have somebody that's never skipped in place before, try to skip in place and and feel like see what that feels like and have to think about it, and then you start throwing change of direction things. The things that they can learn about their body and like the
Hmm.
mapping that their nervous system can
Yeah.
like produce over their entire body
Yeah.
will like they just need that finesse and feel and like fluidity that like athleticism requires
Yeah.
in
Can you
pitching.
tell me the nervous system mapping? Can you explain that to people who are
Yeah.
like, what the hell are you even talking about?
Yeah. So your brain and nervous system control like it sends and receives information constantly. How you interact with the ground. If you don't spend much time, okay, first, everybody will be have a predetermination for like how much you're born with, or
Yeah.
like your starting level and what your ceiling will be. So some people
Yeah.
will walk in and they'll be able to skip perfectly and do all these things, but maybe their
Yeah.
strength will be really low. When you want to enhance the athlete's ability to send and receive information efficiently, you need to expose them to a bunch of different things and put them in situations that provide stability. So that's why if we start with the stability piece, we will use certain tempos in the weight room. So if you make them do like a hard eccentric tempo and they have to go
Hmm.
5 seconds down on their squat, their body is learning the pattern and the sequencing of what a squat's supposed to feel like. And then you go to the other side, the rhythm and the fluidity of what coordinated skipping or change of direction drills and like timing and the shapes that their body's supposed to be in when they want to change direction.
Yeah.
And that will just build like the computer,
Hmm.
and you just keep feeding the computer information and it will learn
Yeah.
and it will figure out and have something to rely on when it wants to go and do a
Yeah.
highly coordinated, high force, high fluidity movement like underhand pitching.
So you can move fast and have low stability. And
Yeah.
then when you go into a movement as complicated as the pitching motion, energy is just essentially like flying all over the place in
Mm-hmm.
the motion. Now, sometimes those pitchers still can throw hard. And for the sake of this conversation, we're talking about velocity, but those pitchers are typically at high increased risk, I will say, for
Oh
pain,
yeah.
injury, etc.,
Mm-hmm.
because the means in which their body is trying to navigate the motion because of that lack of stability, coordination, etc., is huge. I think this is really important to understand. I kind of think of it as this like hierarchy. There's this movement quality element. So it's like,
Mm-hmm.
can you stabilize your body? Essentially, do you have the rhythm and coordination to move in multiple planes, to put the brakes on, etc.? Then can you apply force into the ground? That's a strength concept. Like
Yeah.
you've got to be able to be stable to then really be able to put force into the ground. And
Mm-hmm.
then can you move it fast? And so this is why also just like absolute strength is not what we're going for. Like, let's make sure
Yeah.
all athletes can deadlift 500 pounds, right? And like celebrate that, because there's this element of like, we don't need to do that. We need to put an appropriate amount of force into the ground and then move it quickly to send the energy
Mm-hmm.
back up into the body. So this is the hierarchy of stability, strength, and power. And that it's like the building of a house.
Yeah.
And it really all needs to be there. We
Yeah.
need it all.
And
So,
things change at high speed too. Like
right,
just
right.
being green on the movement assessment, like so much of that is it's a much more controlled environment. And if
Yep.
you're half red on that, like being green in a movement assessment is like what you need to have before you
Absolutely.
like
To
talk about
start the
being
pitching motion.
right. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So, okay, there's this world. So, understanding that hierarchy, if you will, of like what we're looking at. You're right. Like, someone could be stable in the movement assessment, but then at high power,
Mm-hmm.
more unstable, right? But let's talk about the athletes that are like, because we get this all the time. Like, I want to go up in velocity. So, I want to add more power stuff in my workouts. Like, how can I get better at power if I'm not training power? And or they sometimes just skip the question and we'll go right to like, I added
Hmm.
such and such, such and such, and such and such to my program, as if you were like, oh, good idea, I forgot about those, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I
Yeah.
always say when I'm programming for athletes, like, we're writing 3 days, not because I can't think of something else for you to do. Like, it's thoughtful in sort of what days we program, how much rest time, what you're doing on those days, etc. So obviously strength and conditioning is the same. It's a very thoughtful
Yeah.
program, what goes into it and why it's individualized to that athlete. But particularly when athletes, it's the high velo pitchers, they're not adding. They're really not high. It's the athletes who are the majority, who are chasing velocity. They're adding shit to their program. I mean, they want to because they're like, and I get it, it's coming
Yeah.
from a place of like more, more, more. What's the problem with that? What's the challenge of that?
You need, well, if somebody just wants to throw power in for the sake of power, you have to think about what feeds power first. Strength feeds power. You need to have the like prerequisite ability to produce force before you can move something at a high rate of speed like that. Even
Mm-hmm.
like somebody that may look skinny and doesn't look like they can produce a lot of force, if the ball is moving fast, they're
Mm-hmm.
producing force. However, they're making it happen, whatever pattern, efficiency, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But then you get into like workload issues that softball's already riddled with, and you're burning the
Yeah.
candle at both ends, and you want to do more and more and more, do more lessons. People see us and go to a pitching coach outside of that. Same for hitting. And
Yeah.
then they're pitching in a 7 game round robin over the weekend.
Yeah.
And it's like,
Right.
when do
Yeah.
you expect like there's the relationship, you like are exposed to stress and you have a small downturn in performance, then you need the rest to build the adaptation
Mm-hmm.
to raise your ceiling a little bit more. So
Yeah.
like, but if you just keep stressing and not having any time to recover, you're going downhill.
Yeah. Right.
So
Right.
you can't just do more and more and more, which everybody wants to. Everybody sees the inspirational videos that are like, you gotta
Yeah.
grind, you gotta work seven
Right.
days a week. Like, where it's, well, if you just do a lot of like, if you do the few things we tell you to do at an exceptional level and eat
Yeah.
enough and sleep enough
Right.
and like all of those other things, you'll be set up like much better.
So what about, this is kind of along the same lines, but like speed and agility. I don't even know what speed and
Hmm.
agility is. Like, I know what it is, but like I don't know what people claim it is. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, of course I
Hmm.
know what it is. You show up, you are doing like quick feet, you're
Hmm.
doing spin, and now granted, I'm not trying to say like what a crock, because there's an element where obviously like change in direction, there's obviously different sports where certain
Yeah.
things apply a little bit more, but this idea of like, this has come up, I feel like less because we work so hard to educate, but definitely a couple of years ago, a lot of our athletes would say like, my programming is obviously about like strength, but since she really wants to go up in power, should we also join the Thursday night speed and agility? And I'm like, sure, if you want to take your money and put it in the toilet and flush it, go right ahead.
Yeah.
That sounds
Yeah.
great. But like what, like, why is that not the answer? It's the same concept of what you just said,
Hmm.
but I feel like there's this extra spin to like speed and agility that to
Yeah.
me is kind of like a hoax.
Hmm. So, if you want to talk like everybody like poops on the agility ladder, but there's a time and a place for something like that. What
Right.
I would use it for is like an ankle prep thing before we do things at high rates of force and speed.
Yep.
So you could do like your icky shuffle and 1 foot in, 1 foot out, all that, and that will be really good at getting the ankle ready for different like angles of contact.
Mm-hmm.
What's not happening there is there's no significant amount of force produced when you do that.
Mm-hmm.
And for you, an athlete to go from point A to point B, you have to put a high rate of force in the ground at a
Mm-hmm.
high rate of speed. So you're
Mm-hmm.
not really doing either of that. You're when you're doing agility ladder, you're dancing in the same spot. Like within, what
Right.
I'm saying, you're moving 1 foot a
Yeah.
second, which ain't nothing. And the force you're
Right.
putting in dancing in place is not even close to what you would need to your nervous system to be exposed to raise the ceiling
Yeah.
of like what you do now to what you could do later. So it's just there's a lot of flash involved. There's a lot of like you maybe could get like coordination a little bit from it, but again, like with the complexity of underhand throwing or
Yeah, that ain't it, basically.
yeah, it's not,
Yeah.
it's
And
not,
it's, I don't mean to call it a hoax. That's probably strong, but
yeah.
whatever. It's kind of what I feel, you know?
Hmm.
It's like,
Your
it's
time could
this
be
like,
better spent somewhere else.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
you're right. It's not like every exercise they do there is garbage, but it's
Yeah.
more of like a class where the entire thing is about that, you know, or
Yeah.
like a 6 week speed and agility. You know, it's like, you know, and maybe obviously there are different sports. Like if you're a sprinter and there is time spent on like sprinting mechanics, obviously
Hmm.
there's still an element. So there are obviously, I know, components where, you know, things like that might be a little bit more applicable, but this is just general concept of like jumping, hurdling, laddering the entire time. You're pouring sweat, people are yelling at you, and you're you know, you get off and your parents get off the training floor and your parents are like, that was awesome, you
Yeah.
know. And it's
Hmm.
sort of like, yeah, was it though? But that, you know, like there's no link to like, you think that correlates more to velocity, but we would argue that it actually has an inverse relationship with velocity. It's just like smoking you,
Yeah.
you're exhausted,
With everything
and you're
else you're
not
doing.
growing
Yeah.
anything. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're not going to be much different than you were before you walked in that room.
Right. That's exactly right. You just look like you beat the hell out of yourself because you did.
Right.
Um, okay, so this is what I think is interesting. I think we forget that, first of all, we definitely forget that pitching is human movement. And by forget, I mean like we just don't know it because that's not how it's ever been taught. Like it's always been taught as like the mechanics, as if pitching mechanics live in a silo on a planet by themselves, right? Like you could be a terrible mover, you could be 8 years old, but we need you to have perfect pitching mechanics. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Like the pitching lesson world is like really jacked that up.
Yeah.
Where and in reality, it's all just how the body coordinates itself in movement. It's all human movement. It's what we love, you know, like we're lovers of human movement here. We love the like different movement solutions. It's what I love studying about pitching. It's not just about pitching. It's like, this is the parameters of pitching. The brain knows, like I love things like the brain knows at top of arm circle, that's the halfway point. You have to start decelerating back. So if your body is way offline, it will replan, it will send it back. Like they had the strategies that are not, you know, like subconscious that the brain taps into in order to get the task done. To me is like, that's so awesome. I love it. And that's just human movement. It is not like pitching specific. It's just like there are rules in pitching. Like the arm goes overhead, your feet start like this.
Yeah.
You have to throw the ball here. Like there are rules, parameters, and so then the body has to just unravel and organize itself like that. So we definitely like don't understand. We think of, again, this idea of like an 8-year-old, she has no idea how to move her body. She doesn't put any force into the ground, but she's going to go to pitching lessons and try to like perfect mechanics. It's like, talk about a hoax. Like that's a joke, right? Okay, so that's one piece. But then what I also think that we forget is that velocity is pitching velocity is an expression of power. It is just the amount of power you are essentially bringing to the table, and then through how efficient your motion is, you're able to transfer that onto the ball. So we're going to assume you're going to leak energy because the motion is so complex. So we just we want to minimize how much we leak, and we want to bring as much to the table. So I definitely think we forget that. I think in almost every conversation I have about velocity, I open up the athlete's power profile. And I'm like, you want to throw X, it's not even available to you. Like that power, that you're not even close to the threshold that you would need to be at to throw that hard. That seems simple, James. It is like the emoji where someone's brain is exploding is all I can think of right now. It's like people have no idea that velocity, or if they do, but they like don't think of it that way, that pitching velocity is an expression of just power. Like just think power, you know what I mean? So I have a question for you. If our athletes were training to be like power lifters, so let's take the skill out of it for a second. What would programming look like for them? Not in like exercise selection as much, but like recovery, like in, you know, like what would the differences being outside of technique, basically, right? I'm not talking about like the technique of those lists, but if we knew we're going for power in the weight room, that's the sport, then what would it look like? And I think it's interesting because we just don't quite think the same way when all of a sudden we attach a skill to it.
I mean, there's a lot of arrest. you're working at higher intensities. So like for specifically for powerlifters, they're lifting at higher percentages of their 1 rep max. So like you can even throw in like an expression of power, like a power clean. You're not going to power clean more than you can deadlift.
Hmm.
Like you have to be able to pick the bar off the ground before you can think about throwing the bar up to yourself and catching it.
Right.
So
Still
like,
concept of the progression.
yeah, and that's
Yeah.
like get like it's deadlift, it's power clean, and then the throwing a softball is all the way down at that other end. Like you need
Right.
all these other things here to back up your ability to express it down the line.
Yeah. You think like don't you agree that people would understand if you were like training someone who is a power lifter and they were like, I want to lift 7 days a week? Don't you think you would get through to them very clearly that like, well, we're going for power. So you're going to be fatigued. We need to rest in order
Yeah.
to do that. Like, don't you think that's like understood when it comes to like producing power on the strength floor?
You would like it to be, but like even then with sprinting, like
Mm-hmm.
I still have to tell all the girls like, okay, you're gonna do this sled sprint right now, and then you're gonna stand
Mm-hmm.
over there for 30 seconds. Like, so many of them will just
Right.
want to have the sled turned around and go do their next rep, and it's like, for you to be able to run as fast as you can, you need to be
Right.
recovered, and it's not just like an effort thing. Like, well, I'm breathing heavy, and that was hard. It was like,
Right.
yes, but like the speed at which you just went was lower than what your first rep was because you're fatigued. Like you can't
Right.
you can't perform at the highest level without having freshness and being recovered. So like
Yep.
a standard rule in sprinting is for every 10 yards you sprint, you should rest for 1 minute. So like an athlete doing like a 30 yard sprint or whatever, they should be resting at least 3 minutes before they do their next one, not just like walking back to the line and going again.
Right. So that's interesting. Okay. People don't want to rest on the strength floor, you're saying. I made the assumption they at least understand that, but they don't really want to rest on the strength floor. And then pitching, like they do not want to rest. And the game,
Yeah,
sometimes they do, but the game doesn't allow it. So this
yeah.
is why velocity can sometimes be such an uphill battle of like this idea of maybe athletes and families not fully understanding what is necessary from a standpoint of what do you need to even bring to the table. Forget that you've ever thrown a softball in your life. When you walk into that training floor, you walk into that bullpen for the first time, what do you bring to the table with stability, strength, and power already?
Mm-hmm.
That needs to be prioritized. Um, and then this element of like workload in the gym and outside, in the pitching side. That those two pieces are equally challenging, I'd say.
Yeah, yeah.
It's crazy. Okay, now talk about the I feel like less and less. I do feel like this is something that is coming along. Like I think a couple years ago, like a pitch doc, this came up a couple years ago, but like, you know, um, long runs. We still have a
Mm.
lot of schools that like on the first day, they've got like a timed mile
Yep.
and a half. Even the freaking pitchers, I like kind of throw up in my mouth a little bit, you
Mm-hmm.
know? Um, we've got athletes that are like, I want to like be more in shape. We had an athlete, I mean, literally in a top 3 program in the country say like, I want to make sure I'm in shape. Now she's training all summer in our
Mm-hmm.
in our summer program. And then was like, but I still also want to make sure I'm in shape for when I get back to campus. So I
Mm-hmm.
also, 3 days a week, I go for a run for X amount, not
Yeah,
sprinting. I go for a run. Um, I do feel like education's got a little bit better at
yeah.
doing that, but still we hear it all the time. What's the problem with that? And why is that? It's another thing. Like, is that okay? It's like, sure, if you want to make sure that you cap your velocity growth.
Yeah.
So I always say, like, life's about trade-offs, man. You
Mm-hmm.
choose, and I'm not here to tell you what to prioritize. You want to make sure you feel like X or you look like X in your clothing or whatever. You're your own human.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't also say you want to go up in velocity because the things that you're doing to choose A are inversely related to a
Yes.
growth in velocity. So choose one, and I'm not here to say you should choose one or the other, but choose
Mm-hmm.
one. But I don't think they always get that. They think they
Yeah.
can have both, and you can't. Why?
Okay, so there's the fatigue aspect and there's the aspect of what you're telling your nervous system you need to be able to do. So when you
Mm-hmm.
go for a nice, easy 3 mile run at a low speed, that is 30 plus minutes of time you're spending telling your body you need to be good at doing something slow. You need to
Yeah.
be efficient at running at a slow pace. That ain't you. No, we
No,
need you to
that
be
ain't
efficient
pitching
at moving at
James.
a high speed,
Right.
repeated efforts, like anaerobic things. If you want to, like, the mile test is not going to tell a college program anything. You already know, like, the better athletes that you have coming in are already going to do better at the mile than the ones that aren't. Like, a like pre-test when your athletes first step on campus is not going to tell you anything like that. You can't just assume off the bat. Like, you
Yeah.
just need to get them in the weight room. Half of even like these Division 1 athletes that step on campus for the first time have such little structured strength and conditioning training that you could
Hmm.
just throw them right in and start teaching them the skills of the weight room and not spend that week or two doing 1 rep maxes or whatever the heck. Like, if you just train somebody that's never trained in their life for like an entire winter, you don't
Hmm.
think that if you were doing something right, their squat
Right.
would be higher than it was when they first stepped on campus, anyways? So,
Yeah.
like, just assume they suck and teach them what they need to, like, they need to know about the weight room and what that means and feels like, and just get to work. And
Totally.
yeah.
I think the mile, and there are different, like, very, it's not always just a mile, but this idea of like
Mm-hmm.
some sort of distance or like a no rest. There's like beep tests, that are like
Yep.
football fields worth whatever. And I just think, like, I mean, like 100 years ago, I was there as an athlete. When that's being tested, you spend your whole damn summer training for it. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like, job well done, everybody. This is a little condescending, but it does piss me off. It's like, job well done. You just literally asked your athletes to train the opposite, like, train the body and the energy system in a way that does not connect to what the skill and the sport actually requires. It's
Mm-hmm.
painful. There's some, like,
Think of how much standing around there is in softball. You couldn't be like any further away from like the demands of the sport than going out and
right,
telling them to
right.
run for the summer.
No,
Go
and
for
then
jogs.
totally. And like in pitching is like, there's not a lot of stand. I mean, there is obviously as things, but like in pitching,
Mm-hmm.
it is like max level of power, stop for a
Yep.
few seconds.
Yeah.
Max level of power, stop for a few seconds. It's just, yeah, it's pretty unbelievable. I think I get frustrated with that. Sometimes it comes from the coaches. I ask the coaches to be better because I know they're not strength and conditioning professionals, but at this point, coaching, it really does involve a level of like a basic level of understanding of human movement, the body,
Mm-hmm.
energy system. It does. And if you don't feel like you're there, that's a place I feel like as a coach, you need to educate yourself. When
Yeah.
you're making the decisions about what athletes are doing, then you need to spend more time with your strength coach. And then if strength coaches are doing things like that, then I'm like, you shouldn't have your job.
Yeah.
I mean,
And
that's
so
really
many
how I feel.
times they want to just like slap the textbook on the table and be like, well, this is
Mm-hmm.
what it says to do. And it's like, okay, but can you just do like an independent evaluation of the demands of the sport and be like,
Yeah.
wow, yeah,
Right.
what is this feeding? Why would we run a mile? Like, reflect a little
Right.
bit on
Yeah.
what that means. Like, you're not
Yep.
the lacrosse team. You're not like
Right. You're not the soccer
anything.
team
Yeah,
who would be
right.
training
Which I could see
differently.
some things like related
Absolutely.
to that.
Right.
But like, yeah, I
Absolutely.
just
Yeah.
can't draw the picture, but like in my
No,
head between running a mile and softball performance.
exactly. Okay. Here's another one that I think is worth the topic when it comes to velocity is weight. I was watching, I would say the Chiefs game last night. I don't even want to call it the Chiefs game because at this stage I can't stand the Chiefs, but that's a whole nother, not even a podcast episode. It'd be like a personal podcast episode. Anyway, the NFL started last night. I am like, now all of a sudden my life got like infinitely better because I love football season. We started before we even hit record and you were like, I'm watching the Packers game tonight. And I slid my screen down. I'm like, you mean the Eagles game, James? Do you know who you're talking to? I'm offended. And now I don't know if I want to shoot this podcast with you. Kidding. But anyway, so, and they were talking about like this athlete and how much faster he got this year at this and this and this. This is a running back. I think it was on the Ravens. And they were like, he dropped X amount of weight and he did this. And it was
Yeah.
like such a calculated, a decision. Like he dropped this weight because he knew he had to run this. And this topic came up in pitch doc. I don't know if you remember, but coaches were like, are so over the culture of like weight not being like, coaches aren't allowed to like see their athletes' weight in college. And it's literally like the fact that we have taken what an athlete weighs out of the discussion when it comes to performance and velocity is like, shame on us. Now, I know it is complex, but this kind of reminds me of like, if we don't talk about it, it won't exist. Like, oh yeah.
And you can't establish a positive relationship with it. Like, these girls play softball their whole life and want to do well for their program that they end up going to. And if you just ignore a category of what will help them perform or not perform.
Huge category.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's a huge category. So I think like, I know it gets complicated with our young women because there's a lot of body image things. And I only have experience training young women. So there may also be body image things on the male side as well. I don't know. So I'm not trying to. So I don't know. The culture, at least, has not quite always felt the same, right? So, okay. So I understand there are body image things, but oftentimes, like, our athletes are training hard. We don't really come across a lot of athletes. I would say when we have athletes that are a little more overweight, they're the ones who seem to talk about it a little more freely. They're like, I'm losing a little bit of weight. I'm trying to lose weight. Like, somehow they seem to understand, like, my weight is not connected in a positive way to what I want for my performance.
Yeah.
What we like, nobody talk about it, is when athletes are underweight. And a lot of these young girls and young women, and honestly, even at the college level, like, obviously I'm doing these debriefs, and some of these freshmen, I'm like, this debrief needs to be 3.5 seconds long. She isn't strong enough.
Put on 20 pounds. Yeah.
100%. But we really, like, the same way that we have these thresholds. If you're at the college level, here's an elite level broad jump versus an above average versus an average. And we now know, because of the amount of data we've collected, when you're at this threshold, you're likely to throw 63 plus. When you're at this threshold, you're likely to throw 67 plus, right? Like, it's so clear to us at this point. But weight is not in that. And I really think that, like, okay, obviously you can be different weights and move your body, faster than others. But there is this element of, like, this underweight concept. It's so ignored. We pretend as if, like, it's only negative. And there are often times where all I want to say to that athlete in the conversation about why they're not growing, because at the end of the day, if they're like, well, I'm not getting stronger and I'm not getting more powerful and I'm doing strength and conditioning, the answer, what we really want to say is, like, you don't weigh enough, but we don't have anything to go back to. We don't have anything to go back to. Now, we can collect weight. But a couple years ago, we did, and we asked the athletes to opt in or opt out. It was like 70% opted out. Like, that's how many of the girls didn't want to weigh themselves, know their weight, etc. And I was like, what the hell? And then I was like, so we didn't, because we're obviously, we don't even feel like qualified to do this. And I regret that, because I'm like, what we should have really done, and obviously
use it as an opportunity to
use an opportunity of, like, this is not right. These athletes need to see how their weight is factored into how much force they can produce, how fast they can move it. That's ultimately what we're going for. So tell me your thoughts on that, both at our level and this idea at the college level, where it's like the college coaches don't get to see their athletes' weight.
So all of the I'm going to say it. Every single athlete that walks in that's in high school or lower is a developmental athlete. Ain't nobody a pro at 16 years old. So nobody's body is done developing at 16 years old. So
say it from the rooftops, James.
The second question I have every time, like, somebody comes in is, what did you have for breakfast? What did you have for lunch? Depending on, like, the time, like, if it's like our last session of the day at 6, they may have had dinner. So it's like, I just have, like, a expectation of, in my head, if it's like the first kid coming in at 2:00, it's like, okay, they should have had breakfast, they should have had lunch, and they should have had a snack after school before coming to see me. If they didn't do that, and it's not made up of like it can't just be a handful of cashews, like, for a meal. That does not count. But, like, we come back to wanting to perform. You need the basic levels, the iceberg that we were talking about, the pyramid, whatever, the foundational aspects of being able to perform, which is the top of the pyramid, is having the basic things to, like, be alive. Like, you need to eat your 3 square meals a day plus a snack, potentially more, because you are not average. You're not going through the average day. Like, you are putting so much more stress and more things that you need to recover from. So you need to support it that much more with food. So It's never like I don't ever try to like I'm not just yelling at them, but it's like
Yeah,
I'm
right.
I'm gonna take that time and be like, okay, well, your broad jump numbers aren't going up, your pitch velocity hasn't gone up, so let's maybe make a change here, and
Yeah.
what are we
It
not
kind of goes
working
back to
on?
this initial conversation. I said we have to, and I'm not trying to say like we're not responsible for someone's velocity growth. Like, yes, we are. We have a huge we have a huge level of like we contribute a lot to that
Yeah,
story as
right.
far as
Yeah.
efficiency and patterns, helping them manage workload, you trying to develop their stability, strength, ability to
Mm-hmm.
produce power. Like we've all got skin in the game, essentially. But so does the athlete outside of that, right? And
Yep.
this is coming to like there are recovery things like sleep, whatever. There's nutrition things. There's body weight. What is the relationship? So we talk about power as like moving force, applying
Mm-hmm.
force, moving it quickly, essentially. So if that's how we think about power, the production of power, what's the relationship to body weight and force?
More body weight, more force.
Right. So like why
And
aren't there
like
skinny
obviously
why aren't there
good body
skinny
weight,
like
right?
right. Why aren't there
Yeah.
like skinny, frail, like professional athletes? When you look
Yep.
at like the different
Yeah.
positions on the ball field, like on a football field. Now, granted, we're not
Mm-hmm.
playing football, but just like take a look based on what each of those dudes is responsible for doing. Look at the
Yes.
way their build is.
Yeah. Yep. And I would just like, we don't obviously, like we've talked, we don't implement anything with this too, but like, I promise you there will be a linear relationship between skeletal muscle mass and pitch
Yeah.
velocity. There's
Yeah.
guarantee it.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely think it's a space for us that we can continue to grow. We're always
Yeah.
obviously looking. We're never complacent with like, our process is perfect. We're like,
Right.
we're getting damn good. This is like efficient. We're seeing this connection. The data's telling us we're on the right track with this. It's in a really good spot. However, we are always pushing our team internally to think of things we don't have. What could we include? How could we make their story even more powerful?
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely think the weight one is a big one. I just think it's a huge piece. It's the piece that I think the athletes have to bring to the table with them.
Yep.
And so yeah, I think it's just, again, going back to this, like people see the iceberg, like we want to talk about her velocity, and it's like, okay, what's important then is we should then open up every single thing that goes into velocity, not the 30-minute pitching lesson.
Mm-hmm.
Not the like, well, I'm not going up in velocity anymore, so that pitching coach, obviously the pitching coach's role is probably the least like an actual traditional pitching coach, they actually have nothing to do probably with you being able to go up in velocity. Like I would say
yeah.
like zero. This idea of like, I'm going to do pitching drills and go up in velocity. Like, I'm sorry, that ain't happening. You might literally have a radar gun, and because they increased your intent in
Yeah.
that session, your intent to throw harder went up. And so in that session, you threw harder.
Mm-hmm.
But like, if you are literally tracking their trends over time, that I would argue
Or
that
they
my
like
pitching
did some med
coach,
ball throws for like potentiation or something, like just back to the intent.
absolutely.
Oh, I went up 2 miles an hour. It's like,
exactly. But there's no, like, we're not watching
Yeah.
a climb in your,
Right.
yeah. And so I would argue that in the traditional setting of 30 to 60 minutes a week, there is zero contribution from the coach, no matter how good or bad they are as a pitching coach. They are not contributing, because I don't even think they can influence your pattern efficiency in that time frame, right? So I would say none. I would say, from my standpoint, in the way that we, and not just me, but all of our pitching coaches, we have more responsibility because we are designing programming that is consistent. Like, it's not a single session. We're designing programming. We are helping them manage their workload. We are involved with like how much at low, how much at high, are we coordinating with their strength and conditioning. So we have more of an opportunity to influence that, I would say. But compared to what the athlete has to bring to the table, what you bring to the table for them, and what we bring as the pitching people, I think we're the least. We have the least amount of, literally, no pun intended, but like least amount of weight when it comes to how we're all trying to work to build a pitcher's velocity. I really do think that pitching is just the tip. It's the expression of all of that stuff. And so that's the piece that I just think is wildly misunderstood. It always goes directly to the pitching coach. I'm like, we are, like I said, have more involvement than most coaches. And I would still say that what the athlete is doing on her end with food, with weight, with managing weight, with recovery, all of that, and then what they're doing on the strength floor, that's the bulk of the recipe.
Mm-hmm.
Agree or disagree?
No, yeah. That, like, in the weight room, I can give you the physical tools to execute. you at home are supporting and recovering this intent to grow. And then
Hmm.
what they're doing on the pitching floor is the refinement of what they're presenting to you as a individual.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, I would say for anybody who's like in the early stages of this journey and they're like, I want to, it's sort of like you've got to put pitching last to prioritize pitching. Pitching velocity matters. It matters in our game. Doesn't mean everyone needs to throw 70, but you have greater opportunities in our game if you throw 60 than if you throw 53. And you have greater opportunities in the
Mm-hmm.
game if you throw 67 than if you throw 60. It's just velocity does matter in our game. It's a power game. So this idea of like, well, I'm a spin pitcher. I throw 46 or I throw 53, but I'm a spin pitcher. There's an element where it's a power game. You're trying to hit the ball hard. You're trying to throw the ball hard overhand because that's what gets runners out when it can make it there faster. And you're trying to throw the ball hard because we know that higher velocity gets more swings and misses. Does spin, does all this? Yeah, of course, right? But there is an element where speed matters.
Yeah.
And so this idea of like when that's what you're going for, as it should be what you're going for, then just be educated enough to know then what do I need to prioritize in order for it to translate into the pitching motion. So we'll keep doing a better job, I think, of educating. We work really hard on all of our departments and at the individual level. But it's a big discussion. And I still think sometimes I get onto a call with like an athlete and her family who's been with us for years. And sometimes they ask questions. I'm like, damn it. It's hard because I'm like, well, we're accountable. They didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like this, I don't think you can talk about this stuff enough is kind of what I'm getting at.
Oh yeah, yeah. Constant reminders. Like, well, especially with like the out of town athletes that come in and they want to do so well when they come and see us because they can only come and see us once every 3 months or whatever.
Right.
It's like, they come over to the strength floor after pitching with you guys over there with you guys, and then it's like, oh, how'd your pitching go today? And they're like, it wasn't great. My velo was down a little bit. It's like, all right, well, like, what's your day been like? Like, did you have breakfast? Did you eat lunch? Did you? It's like, oh, actually, I only slept like 5 hours. I had 3 tests today before I came here, and I skipped 2 meals. And it's like,
right. It's like, okay.
Why are you like? I don't want to say it like that, but like you need to earn the right to be disappointed when you don't make it happen.
Like you didn't even remotely study for the test. You just showed up, saw things, failed, and then you were like pissed about it. It's
like,
like,
damn,
you've
wow.
got to bring your
what were you
table.
expecting? Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So again, getting back to like, if people are early on, it's like knowing that is the goal, then prioritize the right things. We just immediately jump into like pitching. And I think if you're like your athletes, your daughters are young, you're coaching, your athletes are young, to prioritize this slow growth and build in the weight room, their body awareness, their coordination, stability, to eventually be able to now get into things like strength and power. That's all underneath of pitching. I just like, obviously we couldn't have hammered that anymore here, but like I said, I don't think the education can be like overdone in this category.
It's going to be constant. Like, that's how I feel about like the stuff we put out on social media too. Like, you don't want to cover the same topic because in your head you're like, I already talked about that like a month ago. It's like, well, we also did just get like 50 new followers in the last week, and like there are people that don't know this, and like people forget this because it's not their job and they don't deal with it every single day like we deal with it. And
absolutely, James. And if we really do try to hold ourselves to the like, if I have this conversation and the athlete is a low power athlete, or we know they don't do strength and conditioning or whatever that looks like, or they do, and we know we've educated them on like, this is not the right type of power you should be going for. It's too anterior dominant. There's all kinds of stuff we could go into details, but when they have questions and they don't know, we try to avoid getting into the like, ugh, everyone's so annoying. Why don't they know X? We're like, we assume nobody knows anything, right? Because the culture of pitching, the culture of the game has really gotten the messages wrong because we haven't had the information, or people haven't taken the time to kind of dive into that information. And so we look inward all the time. We're like, okay, how can we do a better job? And that means repeating things over and over and over. Yeah. And keep people educated on that. So yeah, I would say if we could wrap up this conversation, the summary is like, everybody has a role. It's the athlete and her family on the things they need to bring to the table. You have a role in the things you're helping her with. We have a role on the skill side, the pitching side, and what we are bringing to the table. But like I said, I think we really need to understand sort of like, it can't just be I think we have the most limited role in the whole story. And so I think if we can kind of spin our brains a little bit into understanding, like as you said, you've got to earn the right to be disappointed in something like that.
Yeah.
Well said, James. All right. Well, this could go on forever and ever. I think basically we could go into the nitty gritty of our our assessment and the things we see and different trends. And when we have athletes that have innate high power versus here, where I see athletes all the time that they hit the ball really hard. They have unbelievable trunk throws, elite level power. Their broad jump is terrible. They can't translate that power into pitching. It's just so interesting. And not only how much power you produce, but where you produce it from. We could go into a whole nother episode. Maybe we will in a couple weeks. We'll jump back on and go part 2 of more nitty gritty. I think that'd be fun. But for now, we're at 50 minutes. I don't want anybody to snooze on us. So we'll cap it at that. James, thank you for joining today. Appreciate you. I appreciate your brain. Appreciate your passion for our athletes, for OGX. And thanks for being here today.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate it.
All right, everybody. Thanks for joining. Until next time, we'll see you next week.